wonderful. As you can see, there's so many young aspiring devotees here who have joined to connect with you, to hear from you. And I just want to say a little bit about Kurma Prabhu, as a lot of people actually connect to him as the chef, the cook, but he is also, a very special Vaishnava, a very special divine disciple of Srila Prabhupada. Who started, as Prabhuji just mentioned, he started his journey in Australia, and he is gone through so many struggles in the initial days, and it's because of Vaishnavas like this that Srila Prabhupada could actually, make this an international movement, because he's one such gem who has undergone austerities, like he's actually been arrested, he's gone to the prison for so many, services that he was doing, Harinam, Sankirtan, street kirtan, book distribution. And we cannot thank such Vaishnavas enough for, being what they have been in the selfless mood of service to Srila Prabhupada. So that is one aspect of, his amazing contribution to the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. He is one of the pillars of, ISKCON. And also Prabhuji, not many know, but he's a wonderful kirtan singer. He can lead kirtan for hours, wonderful mridang prayer. He's so enthusiastic, and his enthusiasm in kirtan is actually so contagious. He has also written a book which is called The Great Transcendental Adventure, which is about where he actually interviewed, there it is here, Prabhuji showing this book to us, The Great Transcendental Adventure. So Srila Prabhupada visited Australia 6 times, and he has interviewed hundreds of devotees to actually get an account of how this whole Australian yatra began, the initial days. And today, of course, we have so many devotees benefiting from at Sydney, Melbourne, and so many other places in Australia. And this has been possible because of the hard struggle, the austerities, the hardships that devotees like Kurma Prabhu has gone through. So we really cannot thank him enough that we have such a special gem amongst us. We're so honored to have him. And I also want to extend a warm welcome to Her Grace, Dhira Lalita Mataji. We can see she's just sitting right there. She's also an amazing, wonderful, humble Vaishnavi, and she very lovingly and very sweetly offers technical support for all, Kurma Prabhu's online initiatives. And as I say that, behind every man, there's a woman. She is not behind, but of course, hers is better half. And we are both so, actually the whole team here at Practical Spirituality is so happy to have both of you, Prabhuji. Thank you so much. And we just can't wait enough to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. Thank you, Parijata Devidasi, and the Prabhu, who I'm sorry I don't recall your name, who introduced me before, and all the team. I'd like to offer you my humble obeisances. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. And to all of you that are listening today and have taken up your precious time for hearing, which is a good way of using up our time on this earth, hearing about Krishna and hearing about Krishna's pure devotees, which we're going to be doing today. So thank you all. And as you know, in the under the banner of practical spirituality, I've chosen a topic today which fits into that theme, and which I think you'll hopefully appreciate. The talk today I've actually entitled is "Do Something Practical." That's actually a quote from Srila Prabhupada. Do something practical. The pragmatic life of Srila Prabhupada. So I'd like to start today with a little story. Whenever Srila Prabhupada would take his morning walk at the Krishna Balaram Mandir in Vrindavan in the 70s, there was a devotee And if you've been around for some time, you may have met this devotee. His name was Vishal. Vishal was a godbrother. He's a godbrother of mine and a very interesting person. Every day that Prabhupada would circumambulate the Krishna Balaram temple, Vishal would be standing there with his hands folded like this, and he would dramatically, as Prabhupada walked around and came around to the same spot again, he would be there dramatically chanting prayers in praise of the spiritual master from the Srimad Bhagavatam. Not only that, but as he would do this, he would present lengthy translations, and his pronouncements were often Shakespearean in their nature. And sometimes the devotees would be forced to stand there for some time as he recited these prayers. So his timing was somewhat inappropriate, even though he was a sincere Vaishnava. So on one particular occasion, there was water on the temple steps because it had just rained. And Prabhupada, in his position as guru and instructor, he turned to Vishal and he said, "Do something practical. Clean this up." And he pointed to the wet marble steps. Do something practical. This was his response to the glorification. So, the pragmatic life of Srila Prabhupada. What does that mean? What is the meaning of the word pragmatic? For those who don't know, a pragmatic person is a practical, realistic, straightforward, and a reasonable person. A pragmatist is someone who knows what should be done, what should not be done, and when to do or not to do it. And Srila Prabhupada was all of these things. In fact, Srila Prabhupada, for us, is the most pragmatic person that we've ever known. Srila Prabhupada wanted us also to become pragmatic in our devotional life, to be practical. And this is the subject matter of today's talk, to know how to maneuver in this material world, which is ever bewildering, especially these days, an ever bewildering scenario. What should we do? What should we avoid? Now, in order to understand more about this subject of pragmatism or practical application of spiritual principles, it is useful to understand the opposite of the word pragmatic. The opposite of pragmatic is fanciful, overly romantic, imaginative, whimsical, or sentimental. Prabhupada avoided all of those things. He wasn't fanciful, he wasn't overly romantic, he wasn't imaginative, whimsical, or sentimental. Rupa Goswami wants us to accept all of those things which are favorable for advancing in spiritual life, and he recommends us to reject all those things which are unfavorable. So we should avoid being fanciful, romantic, imaginative, whimsical, or sentimental, and we should embrace pragmatism. For example, Srila Prabhupada gave us solid information about God, no whimsical, vague ideas. Prabhupada said, "I've given you Krishna's name, his address, and what he looks like." He spoke about this on the first Krishna Consciousness album that he recorded in New York in 1966, if I recall, in those early days in New York. You've probably heard this album many times. On that album, he chants the Brahma Samhita and then he recites the translation, which is actually excerpt from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's purport to the verse, Venum kvadantam aravinda dalaya taksham bharhavatam sammasitam buddha sundarangam kandarpa koti kamaniya vishesha shobham govindam adi purusham tamahang bhajami. So Prabhupada spoke the translation and the commentary. He said, "I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is adept in playing upon his flute, with blooming eyes like lotus petals, with head decked with peacock's feather, and the figure of beauty tinged with the hue of blue clouds, and his unique loveliness charming millions of cupids." Prabhupada then spoke his excerpts from the purport. And whenever I read this, I can hear Prabhupada speaking it in my mind. The matchless beauty of Krishna, the Supreme Lord of Goloka, is being described. Krishna, the all-pervading cognition, has the spiritual form of his own. The form of Krishna is not a fanciful creation of imagination, formed after visualizing the beautiful things of the world. What Brahma saw in his ecstatic trance of pure devotion is being described. Krishna is engaged in playing on his flute. That flute, by his enchanting musical sound, attracts the hearts of all living beings. Just as a lotus petal produces a pleasant sight, so the two beautiful eyes of Krishna, who causes the manifestation of our spiritual vision, display the unlimited splendor and beauty of his moon-like face. So this is not a vague description of a formless, nameless God. This is God in his full, rich description. The description goes on. The loveliness that adorns his head with the peacock feather figures, the corresponding feature of the spiritual beauty of Krishna is gorgeous. Just as a mass of blue clouds offers a specifically soothing, pleasant view, the complexion of Krishna is analogously tinged with a spiritual dark blue color. The beauty and loveliness of Krishna is far more enchanting than that of Cupid, multiplied a millionfold. So, that is Prabhupada's description and the Lord Brahma's description and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's description of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Not vague, not sentimental. So, pragmatic, practical spirituality. How can we best utilize our time in this short life to offer practical devotional service to Krishna? Since the term practical or pragmatic devotional service informs, or should I say, infers action, it infers there is some activity, I thought it would be appropriate to hear what Krishna, Lord Sri Krishna, says in the Bhagavad Gita about this subject. Practical devotional service is described in the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 4, Transcendental Knowledge, about what is action, what is inaction, and what is forbidden action. This is Bhagavad Gita 4:17. Karmano yapi bodhavyam cha vikaramanaha akarmanascha bodhavyam gahana karmano gotihi. And the translation of this verse is that the intricacies of action are very hard to understand. Therefore, one should know properly what action is, what forbidden action is, and what inaction is. And there's a very, very nice purport to this verse. And in the last paragraph of this purport, everything is summed up very nicely. Prabhupada says, to understand all this, how to act in Krishna consciousness, one has to associate with authorities in Krishna consciousness and learn the secret from them. It's interesting to note that Prabhupada describes the subject of how we can act on a daily basis in Krishna consciousness as a secret. It's the secret of all secrets, and it is an open secret. And to the non-devotees, it is impossible to understand, but for the devotees, it is possible. How is it possible? To associate, Prabhupada says, with authorities in Krishna consciousness and learn the secret from them. This, he says, is as good as learning from the Lord directly. Otherwise, even the most intelligent persons will be bewildered. And this secret of how to use our time practically in Krishna consciousness can be revealed to us by the great devotees. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu described practical devotional service in very great detail to his disciples, namely Rupa Goswami and Sanatana Goswami. There's no lack of information. To Sanatana Goswami, he described that devotional service, when performed with our present senses, can be called practical devotional service. We have been given, just like when you go into the army, you're given a uniform. When you go to jail, since Parijata Devidasi mentioned my going to jail, I was there 3 times for distribution of books and chanting on the street and non-payment of fines. And so we didn't pay the fines. We ended up with $60,000 worth of fines, the whole group of us. And that was a very, very large amount of money in those days. That would have been about $6 million worth of fines in these present day. So I was thrown into jail and I was given a uniform. I went into jail with a nice dhoti and kurta. But when they dragged me through the gutter to get me into the police wagon, I was dragged through the mud and it had been raining. So I was all muddy. And when I went to jail, they took all my clothes and I think they did it on purpose. They screwed it all up into a ball and they stuffed it in a plastic bag for me from when I left. And they made sure it wasn't folded. And then they gave me a prison uniform. So when we go to prison, we get a prison uniform. It was gray and monotonous and horrible. When you enter this material world, you're given a uniform, and the uniform is the material body. And the material body has senses. But Prabhupada has always informed us that we should learn the art of making use of the best use of a bad bargain. So this material body is a bad bargain, but it can be used nicely in Krishna's service. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu explains to Sanatana Goswami that when devotional service is performed with our present senses, whatever Krishna has given us, we've got our arms, our legs, knowledge acquiring senses, working senses, using them in the service of Krishna is called practical devotional service. Mahaprabhu also explains Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhya Kabunai Shravanadi Sukti Chitte Kore Udai. That actually, this is not our real body. We have a spiritual body. We have a spiritual identity. And along with that spiritual identity, there is devotional service, which is lying dormant within everyone. And by associating with the devotees and hearing nicely and chanting nicely in the association of Krishna's pure devotees and sincere devotees, then we can make advancement, and our dormant spirituality, our dormant Krishna consciousness will be revived. Prabhupada said, it's not an artificial imposition on the mind, but rather it is our natural identity. Devotional service is the eternal life of the living entity. And practicing devotional service wakes up that dormant spiritual life. Mahaprabhu went on to explain that constitutionally we're part and parcel of Krishna. The Lord is compared to the sun, and we're compared to particles of sunshine, molecules of sunshine. And devotional service means to revive our glowing spiritual body. So this last line of Prabhupada's purport to that verse of Bhagavad Gita is very important. Devotional service can be practiced with our senses under the direction of a bona fide spiritual master. Srila Prabhupada has given us so much. He's given us his instructions. He's given us the instructions of Mahaprabhu to Sanatana Goswami, unlimited reading matter, unlimited philosophical guidance. And Prabhupada has given us his personal association. Prabhupada is our exemplar for practical devotional service. So Lord Krishna himself in the Bhagavad Gita in a number of places, including the purport to the verse I just read, and of course, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Sanatana and Rupa Goswami have confirmed that we have to execute devotional service and learn how to do it from the spiritual master in this ever bewildering material world. So yes, Prabhupada has given us everything, step by step, day by day. He's taught us how to progress from the time we are present in this material body to the time we have to give it up. And that's the big picture, and the small picture is from the moment we rise up in the morning and wake up, Hare Krishna, and we shake off the evening, the nighttime sleep until we fall asleep again at night. How to fill that day with Krishna consciousness. And he said that that the essence, the condensed milk, just like you have milk and you cook it down and you cook it down until it's thick and rich. You have the rubbery, and then you cook it down further until it becomes very thick and solid. That creme de la creme, that condensed milk of instructions, is there in one verse from the Padma Purana. Smartavyam satatam Vishnu vishmatavyam najatu chit sarva vidhi nisidhasyu etayo eva kinkaraha. And the translation, as you know, for this verse is that Krishna is the origin of Lord Vishnu. He should always be remembered and never forgotten. And all the rules and regulations, all the rules, the things to do and the prohibitions, the things that we should not do, they are all servants of these two principles. That is the essence of our daily practical life. We should always remember Krishna, smartavyam satatam Vishnu, and vismartavyam najatu chit, never forget him. So as I said, from the morning to the night, Prabhupada has shown us how to engage ourselves in pure devotional service. In his purport to one of the nice verses in that chapter where Mahaprabhu instructs Sanatana Goswami, Srila Prabhupada writes, quote, concerning Prataha Smriti, remembrance of the Lord in the morning, in the early morning hours known as Brahma Muhurta, one should get up and immediately chant the Hare Krishna mantra, or at least Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. In this way, one should remember Krishna. Some shlokas or prayers should also be chanted. By chanting, one immediately becomes auspicious and transcendental to the infection of material qualities. Actually, one has to chant and remember Lord Krishna 24 hours a day, or as much as possible. So Prabhupada has given us those essential 2 points. Always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna. And when to start and how to start our day so that the rest of the day goes wonderfully in Krishna consciousness. Be up before the Brahma Muhurta and fill those morning hours. He explains that whatever we do in those early hours of the day, that sets the course of the day. If you wake up late, you wake up in a bad consciousness, you go online or you do something else instead of chanting Hare Krishna, your day will be a little bit underwhelming. Prabhupada has told us, go to Mangal Arati, chant Hare Krishna, rise at the most auspicious part of the day. So these are very, very practical things. I was hearing the other day a very nice class, and a devotee asked Srila Prabhupada at the end of the class, and I'm paraphrasing, you said that we should remember Krishna at the time of death. Is it okay, Srila Prabhupada, if we think of you at the time of death? Prabhupada closed his eyes momentarily, and he opened them again, and then he said, yes. So thinking of Krishna and thinking of Krishna's pure devotees, that is identical. The next topic that I'd like to talk about under this banner of pragmatic, practical devotional service is using common sense in the service of Krishna. As I said before, we are learning how to prosecute devotional service by reading Prabhupada's books. Prabhupada said that we should study them threadbare. We should study them threadbare. We should read the Gita and the Bhagavatam so much, turning the pages. If you look at that word threadbare literally, it means, I've seen devotees, sometimes they have a Bhagavad Gita. They've read it so many times, they've turned the page so many times that it's ragged, the pages are almost falling out. Even if we don't take it literally, it means that we should go over and over and over again and study deeply everything that Prabhupada has written. We can also learn from the life of Srila Prabhupada by reading, like the book that I wrote, or this one, which I'm reading at the moment, which is a wonderful book. This is volume 5 of the Memories book by Siddhanta Prabhu. This is the transcripts of all the video interviews that are done with by Sriman Siddhanta Das with Prabhupada's disciples. You must have seen some of those on YouTube, and they've all been transcribed into 5 volumes. And if you really, really want to understand the life of Srila Prabhupada and how wonderful, so how many wonderful examples Prabhupada is setting by his life, we can read these books. Extremely inspirational. Just like Giriraj Swami's new book about the Juhu Beach struggle to get a nice temple for Radha Rasa Bihari. I'm looking forward to get my copy somehow or other. You can read these pastimes of Srila Prabhupada and gain immense inspiration and immense education as to how to be practical in devotional service. Just like in those early days in Juhu, devotees were saying, what are we doing here? There's rats the size of cats, and there's mosquitoes, and we're living in a slum. And why are we so far away from Bombay? Has Prabhupada made a mistake? Why has he chosen this place? But of course, as we know, Prabhupada knew that this was the perfect place to have a temple. And as you read about these pastimes unfolding, you can see Prabhupada's immense spiritual intelligence at work. So we can learn so many things from the practical life of Srila Prabhupada. So we're on the topic of common sense. Prabhupada was very much in favor of using common sense. Use your common sense. Sometimes people ask a question and the answer is, just use your common sense. Sometimes common sense is required. What is common sense actually? Defined as sound judgment in practical matters. Sound judgment in practical matters. Prabhupada was exceptional in exemplifying everyday common sense. Common sense can't be overestimated. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote, man's glory is in common sense. There was a famous letter, Vidya Devi Dasi in the early days was asking Srila Prabhupada how to worship Tulsi Devi. And she sent a long list of questions to Prabhupada, a long list. You can see those, you can see the answer, and I think the questions have also been published somewhere. And Prabhupada patiently answered in his letter. In those early days, Prabhupada's letters were sometimes very long and very detailed. And he answered as best as possible all of her questions. Finally, to one question, he said to Vidya Devi Dasi, he said, use common sense. And if you have none, then consult with others. Very axiomatic truth. Use common sense, and if you have none, consult with those that do have common sense. So that brings us to another angle of vision on this subject. How do we keep things practical? Because sometimes the day starts off really well, and then it starts to go, as they say, go south. Things start to, motor passion enters. You get distractions and you lose your direction, lose your perception of what to do and what not to do. Prabhupada wrote a very nice letter in this regards to a devotee called Yageshwara in 1972. Yageshwara. We had a Prabhupada disciple initiated in Australia also as Yageshwara, but I think this is a different one. And he wrote a very, very long letter to Yageshwara, and because Yageshwara had asked many very good questions. And he wrote, Krishna consciousness means practical living, not something utopian or idealistic or vague. We simply should do the needful. Whatever pleases Krishna most, that is all. Prabhupada was very fond of using that term, do the needful. These are all old English terms which Prabhupada used and which are very powerful and very potent. Do the needful. That's an extension of use your common sense. Use your common sense and do what has to be done. And if you don't know what has to be done, that's okay. If you need to know, then ask someone. But Prabhupada stressed that it's not vague, idealistic, utopian. No, don't speculate. Don't make up things. ask. Prabhupada was never, it was always in favor of devotees asking him. Sometimes devotees would do something speculative, some nonsense. And Prabhupada said, if you didn't know how to do it, then I'm your spiritual master. Why don't you ask me? So this is important. So if we study Prabhupada's books and we study the life of Srila Prabhupada, we will know how to do the needful. In essence, the reply in that letter could be broken into two things. Learn what pleases Krishna and learn what displeases Krishna by studying his books, Prabhupada's books. And Prabhupada has always explained that if you want to yasya prasadat bhagavat prasado, yasya aprasadam nagati kutopi. If you please the spiritual master, then you're pleasing Krishna. If you don't know how to please Krishna, you find out what Prabhupada wants you to do by reading his books, by following his instructions, his letters, his lectures. Find out what pleases the spiritual master and do that. And you should avoid doing those things which will cause displeasure to the spiritual master. And if you please the spiritual master and avoid the things which displease him, then you'll be making spiritual advancement because Krishna will be pleased. And if you please Krishna and you please the spiritual master, yasya devi parabhakti, yata devi tata guru, then everything's going correctly. And at the same time, Prabhupada said, we should never give up devotional service and we should always stay within the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And therefore, just by the sheer fact that we are doing our service every day, even though sometimes imperfectly, just by performing our services every day, we will become purified. So that is, in essence, how to stay on track in practical devotional service. Rupa Goswami says there are 6 things that one should do, and there are 6 things that one should not do. The Nectar of Instruction is our handbook. Avoid overeating, etc. What's that verse, dear Lalita? I'll put her on the spot now. Atyahara prayasascha prajalpo niyamagraha janasangascha lolyam cha sadbi bhakti prasidyati vinasyati. Right, vinasyati. 6 things that one should avoid. And then there are 6 things, of course, that one should embrace. And that's the subject of another class. But there is no lack of information. Some examples of Prabhupada's inspiring execution of devotional service. Prabhupada had another wonderful set of terms that he used describing this subject. As you may know, there is a well-known English phrase, jack of all trades, master of none. This is sometimes taken as a compliment. If someone is able to do so many things, someone says, oh, he's a jack of all trades. But the full quote is, jack of all trades, master of none. So in actual fact, it also can be used as an insult. In other words, someone knows how to do so many things, but he doesn't know how to do anything in detail. So that can be also a negative thing. You dabble in many things, but you've never become expert in anything. Srila Prabhupada, he brilliantly reworked this idiom, and he showed by his example how we should practice the opposite of that. He said that a devotee, quote, should know something of everything and everything of something. I'll say that again, let that sink in. A devotee should know something of everything and he should know everything of something. So you should know how to do everything, and you should specialize in one particular thing. Of course, we all specialize in trying to become Krishna conscious, but Prabhupada was a brilliant example of knowing how to do everything. Prabhupada, as well as being a great sadhu, an exemplar of pure devotional service, a sannyasi of the highest order, Krishna's representative, he was also a brilliant musician, a brilliant business person, a brilliant organizer, brilliant at banking, cleaning, facilitating all sorts of things, advising natural health advice to his disciples, And also Prabhupada was a brilliant cook. So Prabhupada was expert at so many things. Actually, in the subject of cooking, Prabhupada told us that he was never taught to cook. He never learned from any one person. He said, I learned to cook by watching others. By watching others. He said his sister was a good cook. His mother was a wonderful cook. And he also learned to cook by watching people cooking on the street. He would go out and he would watch people make puris. When these people, when you see people cooking on the street, it's usually they specialize in one thing. There's a puriwala, someone making aloo vada, someone making jalebis, someone making sweets. And they've been doing it for decades and they know how to do it perfectly. And under the most austere circumstances, they can cook these wonderful things. So Prabhupada would watch as a young boy and as a young man. He would watch and he would learn how to cook just from watching others. And also Prabhupada had a very sharply refined sense of taste. I was speaking to Dinabandhu Prabhu the other day. He mentioned a story on Facebook and then it disappeared off my feed, and I wrote to him and I said, could you tell me that story again, that wonderful story about Srila Prabhupada and the chapatis? So I'll share that story with you. He kindly sent it to me again. So Dinabandhu writes in this connection, this story was told to me personally by Yamuna Devidasi. One time, Srila Prabhupada was coming to Vrindavan, and so Yamuna asked the Brijbasis what was the best way to make chapatis. They told her to get the red Punjabi wheat berries, the wheat grains, grind them in the morning, in other words, freshly ground that morning, and cook the chapatis over a neem wood fire. So get the right sort of wheat, and they suggested the Punjabi red wheat, grind it as close to cooking time as possible, and cook it over neem wood. So when Srila Prabhupada came, Jamuna got the red Punjabi wheat berries, she ground them into flour, she added water, made a dough, and then she cooked the dough, the chapatis, over burning neem wood. She brought Srila Prabhupada his plate, and then she ran in with a freshly cooked chapati and placed it on Prabhupada's plate. Prabhupada took one bite, and he remarked, he said, this was made with red Punjabi wheat berries. You ground it this morning and cooked it with neem wood. So Prabhupada was highly advanced in his culinary discrimination. He was a wonderful cook. There's so many stories. In Sydney, we tried to make chapatis for Prabhupada when he first came, 1971, not me personally, but Bali Madan and another devotee, they tried to make chapatis for Prabhupada with his lunch. The first ones were like bricks. They were hard and crunchy. Prabhupada said, no. So he said, I can't eat this. So then they made, they tried to make chapatis and make them a bit softer, and they ran one in, Bali Madan. It was raw. It was raw. It wasn't cooked at all. Prabhupada said, this is raw. And then they tried again for the third time, and it was burnt and raw at the same time. Prabhupada said, if you didn't know how to make chapatis, why didn't you tell me? And I would have shown you. There we go. That's Prabhupada's being practical, doing the needful. What did he do? He stood up, went and washed his hands. He went into the kitchen and he took the dough, and the dough was very hard. So he submerged the ball of chapati dough in a bowl of water. Submerged it in a bowl of water, and then took it out and kneaded it, and it became very soft. And then he went to cook the chapati. Previously, Bali Madan had said, oh, Srila Prabhupada, we can't cook chapatis in the kitchen because there's only an electric stove. And Prabhupada was not happy with that excuse. So on the same electric stove, Prabhupada rolled chapatis quickly and efficiently, perfectly round, and they all puffed up until the steam came out. And then he went and he took his lunch with his nice hot chapati. So Prabhupada was expert. Another wonderful example in this spectacular book. You've got to get this book, by the way, and if you like, you can read the other 4 volumes. I've read the first 4 volumes of this book. I've read them 4 times each, and I'm almost through my second reading. For me, reading and hearing about Srila Prabhupada, especially in the evening before I go to sleep, I want to dream about Srila Prabhupada and absorb myself in Srila Prabhupada. It's the same as thinking of Krishna. If you can think of your spiritual master, it's the most wonderful thing. So I was reading the other night, and I'll share it with you from Ranchor Das. He recalls that he says, in his room at the Bhaktivedanta Manor, there was always space for quite a number of guests, seating 30 or 40 people comfortably. One time, however, I entered the room, and it wasn't too full, and Prabhupada was already engaged in conversation with an Indian Mayavadi Swami. I could sense from the atmosphere in the room that Prabhupada didn't particularly want to engage with this man. Prabhupada was not particularly enthusiastic to talk with Mayavadis, and at the end of the conversation, the Swami left Srila Prabhupada a whole pile of pamphlets advertising his talks or whatever, or advertising his philosophy, single-sided sheets of paper, a big stack. And he left them with Srila Prabhupada, and he exited the room. So when everyone, when the Swami left the room, Prabhupada said to his servant, distribute these to everyone. And I heard this story from another devotee who was there in the room, and this other devotee was saying, we were astonished. Why is Prabhupada distributing this Mayavadi literature to us all? So Ranchor continues. Prabhupada said to his servant, distribute these. Everyone should have one. Okay. Each one of us was sitting there with these pamphlets in hand, and Prabhupada said, now take prasadam, and the pamphlet can be used as a plate. So we ate prasadam that was distributed, and the brochure was our plate. That's a wonderful example of using everything in Krishna's service, doing the needful, and not wasting anything. Another wonderful example of using everything in Krishna's service was told to me by Upendra Das. Upendra Das passed away in 1991 in Australia. If it wasn't for Upendra Das, I wouldn't be sitting here today speaking with you, because Upendra Das and Bali Madan came to Australia in the early days, 1970, to spread Krishna consciousness in that southernmost land. And they were the only two Vaishnavas, disciples of Srila Prabhupada, in that huge country. And they were living in Sydney. And in the service of Srila Prabhupada and under Srila Prabhupada's instructions, they were chanting on the street, distributing literature, and introducing people to Krishna consciousness. And many of my god brothers and god sisters today in Australia and around the world owe their life to Bali Madana, and especially Upendra, who introduced them to Krishna consciousness 50 years ago. In fact, 50 years ago this year is I came to Krishna consciousness in April of 1971. So one day my father was going to work and coming home from work, and he met Upendra on the street, and Upendra gave him some literature. And to cut a long story short, my father couldn't make head or tail, as they say, of this, and he gave it to me. I was in my last year of high school, and this was my first introduction to Krishna consciousness. It was a pamphlet on chanting Hare Krishna. It was a one-sided pamphlet, and this was the beginning of my spiritual journey. Now, Upendra later on went to open up a temple in Fiji and other places, but he got the ball rolling in a wonderful way and brought many people to Krishna consciousness. So in 1994, I went to visit Upendra to interview people for my book, Prabhupada in Australia. I traveled across the whole world to find all these devotees, wherever they were, to try to churn the nectarine of Prabhupada's pastimes. Upendra told me this very, very nice story. He recalls that when he first joined the temple, he was a very young lad, 16, I think, or 15 years old. And the devotees told him, they read in Nectar of Devotion or something, that you should offer your favorite article, your favorite item, your favorite thing in your possession. You should offer that to Krishna. So he thought, I should do that. So he offered Prabhupada, when he first joined, he offered Prabhupada his baby blanket. This was the blanket that he was wrapped up in when he was a little baby, and Upendra was very soft-hearted, a little sentimental sometimes. But anyway, he offered this baby blanket to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada looked at the baby blanket and he said, "This is useless. What should I do with this?" And Upendra was thunderstruck. I think he said he went and cried. But then next day, he went into Prabhupada's room and he noticed that Prabhupada had folded up the baby blanket and used it as a sitting mat for guests when they came to see him in his room in San Francisco. So that's another example of using everything in Krishna's service, being practical, being pragmatic. Mukunda Maharaj, Mukunda Goswami, also recalls in this very nice memories book about how Prabhupada had keen business acumen. Keen business acumen. When you read the story of the Juhu Beach struggle in Giriraj Swami's book, you probably know the stories. There's some that you may not have heard, but remarkable. Prabhupada was remarkably astute in all business dealings. For example, Mukunda Goswami mentions, one day we met a person who owned a recording studio at Oakland, California, across the Bay Bridge from San Francisco. We recorded a song written by Hayagriva called Narada Muni, the Eternal Spaceman. And I wrote the music. Mukunda Goswami wrote the music. On the other side of the 45 RPM record, we recorded the Hare Krishna mantra, a kind of nice lilting version of the mantra with the sitar. When we told Prabhupada about the recording, he said, "Oh, that is very good. Immediately print 1,000 copies." We didn't have enough money to print even 100 copies. We were very attuned to the fact that Prabhupada was not only a sadhu or a holy person, but also a very business-minded person. And he knew the value of printing 1,000 copies of a record. So Prabhupada took many opportunities to do bold business ventures, and he was always assisted by Krishna, and he was always successful. Another example of doing the needful, and this is Mukunda recalling again. One time, while Prabhupada was in John Lennon's estate in the servants' quarters, I entered his room and he saw that I was wearing a sports coat that was a little soiled. He frowned and he said, "In England, you dress, then address." This was another saying by Srila Prabhupada. First dress, then address. In other words, you're in England, people like to dress appropriately, people are wearing suits and ties, and you're wearing a soiled waistcoat or jacket. So he said to Mukunda, do you understand what that means? First dress, then address. Mukunda says, I thought for a minute and then I said, okay, I think I understand what that means, Srila Prabhupada. And the next day, Mukunda went out and he bought a pinstripe suit. Then he said, I wanted to show Prabhupada my new suit that I just purchased, but when I was on the way to meet him, the ground was very muddy. I thought, okay, I'm going to show Prabhupada my new suit, but I'm supposed to bow down every time I see Srila Prabhupada, but if I bow down, I'm going to get mud all over my new suit. So he stood up and he went to bow down, and then he hesitated, and then he went to bow down again, and then he looked at the mud, and then he hesitated. And he said, the Prabhupada must have thought I was a bobbing bird because I kept going down and going up. And then Prabhupada looked at him and nodded and smiled. In other words, Prabhupada was expert at communicating with just the movement of his head. And in other words, he was saying, that's all right. I understand everything. No need to bow down. You just bought a new suit. Are you going to completely ruin the suit again? But because you want to follow all the rules and regulations? Or are you going to be practical and not bow down in the mud? So, look, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of stories like this. But it's a wonderful standard. I've got two more little stories that I'd like to share with you here. This was by Ravi Das. Now, Ravi Das was on Lokanath Swami's Padayatra team in the early days, and Lokanath Swami had asked Ravi to go to the big city somewhere, I can't recall which city it was, Delhi or Bombay or Calcutta, and buy a bullock cart And Ravi had then gone to Prabhupada's room and negotiated with Prabhupada that he needed a certain amount of money to buy the bullock cart. And that was agreed upon. But then Prabhupada gave an instruction to Ravi. He said, before you go and buy the cart, or when you go and buy the cart, make sure you buy a cart with inflatable tires, not with wooden wheels. Make sure you don't get a cart with wooden wheels, get a cart with inflatable tires. Because if you get a cart with inflatable tires, then it is not subject to road tax. Prabhupada knew that. So Ravi says, I realized Srila Prabhupada was brilliant, not only in spiritual matters, but practical, day-to-day material matters as well. Finally, I'd like to leave you with a little amusing anecdote about doing the needful. While Prabhupada was in his apartment in 1971 in Sydney, he wasn't living in the temple because there was no facilities. So one devotee called Raghunath and his wife, they moved out of their apartment in Bondi overlooking the ocean, and they let Prabhupada stay there. And it was about 15 or 20 minutes journey to the temple. So one day, Prabhupada was in his apartment in Bondi. He took his bath, and after he took his bath, he found he had no copans. There were no copans. Normally, Prabhupada had 2 pairs of copans, Brahminical underwear. He would wash one at lunchtime, and there was another one hanging up that he would put on, dry copans. So he washed his underwear, washed his gamsha, and then he found there's no copans because all the devotees in charge of the laundry had taken all Prabhupada's clothes to the temple, including his copans. So he had no copans. What to do? So there were other devotees there in the apartment. They were running around, what to do. And then they ran off somehow to get to the temple to try to find Prabhupada's copans. Right. You know, devotees were sincerely trying, but how long would that have taken? Anyway, they came back from the temple, and Prabhupada was sitting there very nicely, and they saw on the bed was a dhoti, one of Prabhupada's dhotis, that he had torn up. He tore up his dhoti and made new ones. So very simple. Get a dhoti and tear it up and make new copans. Prabhupada smiled at the devotees and said, just see, I am independent. So, and then look, there are hundreds of more stories about the practical life of Srila Prabhupada, how to practice practical devotional service, but our time has run out. So I'd like to thank you very much for listening today, and I'd like to ask if anyone has any questions or comments.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. I'll just read questions from the chat and pass them on.
Thank you.
That's fine. Yeah. So someone is asking, can you kindly share some of your experiences with Srila Prabhupada with respect to prasadam, if possible?
With respect to prasadam. Okay, I cooked for Prabhupada on 2 occasions, but I actually didn't cook for him directly. I was cooking for the deities, and then he ate the Mahaprasadam. I never got the chance to cook personally. Well, I did actually on the second example, but the first time I was cooking the evening offering. Prabhupada had gone to the Sydney Town Hall at the famous Sydney Town Hall lecture of 1973, he was speaking there, and all the devotees had gone, and I was left behind at the temple, as was the habit in those days. Everybody would go to the program except the pujari. I was the pujari. I stayed back and missed everything, often. And so I had to do the evening 7 o'clock offering, cook the boga, and then do the arati. And then I had to cook the late offering, and which was puris, sabji, laddu, hot milk. And then I had to do the evening arati, and then I had to put the Lord to rest. So we had, the pujari's life was a busy life, and especially in those days, they were very short, so we had to cook as well. So Prabhupada went to the lecture, and I was in, at this time, it was 9:15 or something like that. Prabhupada had returned from the Sydney Town Hall. I was offering arati, and I was singing, because there was no one there in the temple, so the pujari would also sing. So being a pujari in those days, you had multitasks. You would cook, you would sing, you would put the Lord to rest, you would offer the bhoga, and etc., etc. So I was singing, I was happy, I was singing at the top of my voice, multitasking, ringing the bell, offering the incense, singing. Prabhupada had come into the temple room and he was standing right behind me, but I didn't know he was there because I was making a whole lot of noise with the bell and with my bellowing voice. And I never knew that Prabhupada was there until they told me later. And anyway, Prabhupada left the temple room and he said to Bhagavan, "Who is that?" And Bhagavan said, "Oh, that's Komadas, Srila Prabhupada." And Prabhupada said, "Oh," he said, "Kurma Deva." That was my nickname, I guess, from then on. Although just something that I only know about. I don't share it much, although I think it's there on my Facebook page. So Prabhupada referred to me as Kurma Deva. And then anyway, he was feeling a little hungry. Prabhupada would often feel very hungry in the evenings, especially after preaching. Prabhupada's preaching at that program was wonderful. He'd got an appetite because he hadn't eaten since 12 o'clock and it was 9 o'clock. So he said to Shruti Kirti, "Is there any, go and check if there's any prasadam." So Shruti Kirti went to the kitchen and I was in the middle of doing the arati and the deity's plate was on the table. So they brought that prasadam in for Srila Prabhupada. There was eggplant and potatoes, there was a cauliflower dish, and there was something else. I can't remember what it was. And there was laddus, and there was hot milk. And the puris were nice. I used to make nice puris. And Prabhupada had told us, in fact, I think it was this occasion when he clarified that when you cook for the deities, he told us that you should cook as if you were cooking for a hungry 16-year-old boy. If anyone has a hungry 16-year-old boy living in your house, you will know that 16-year-old boys can eat a lot. So Prabhupada said you should cook that much for Krishna. And your meditation is that Krishna is hungry. He's a hungry adolescent. So not that you make tiny little puris and a little half fill the bowls. No, generous quantities. And at that time, he also said that that evening offering, that late offering, of course, Prabhupada gave different instructions, but he said, not to me personally, but to Bhagavan and the devotees in the room, you should either make 4 very big puris per plate, or you should make 6 medium-sized puris per plate, or you should make 16 little puris per offering plate. Now, different temples have different standards and instructions, but that's what he told us in Sydney. Anyway, he took prasadam and he liked the puris very much. They were all puffed up and they stayed puffed up. They weren't puris that when you cook them and then and they all deflate and they look very sad. And then horror of horrors, someone takes them and puts them all on top of each other and brings them out like that. So you've got this basket or this bowl full of puris that have all look like tires and they've all squashed and they're all soggy. No, puris should be puffed up and it should stay puffed up. When you go to a place that sells puris on the street, you'll see they show you the puris and the puris are round. And even though they're cold, they're still puffed up. That's puri. And so anyway, Prabhupada enjoyed the puris and he said, "Who has cooked?" And they said, "Komadas cooked." And then he said to Shruti Kirti, you should find out how to cook puris from Kurma, and because I think my puris were better than Shruti Kirti's. So anyway, next day Shruti Kirti came to me and he said, "Prabhupada asked you to show me how to cook puris." So I said, "Oh, wow, wonderful. Okay." He said he liked your puris. And then next day Prabhupada was flying to Hawaii, so they asked if I could cook some sabji, eggplant potato sabji I made, and puris for the trip. That was my only interaction with Prabhupada with prasadam.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. Beautiful stories. Another question is, Hare Krishna, Dandavat Pranam. Thank you for the wonderful session. Please let us know which all books should we read to get to know more such Prabhupada Leela, and also which are your favorite spiritual books.
Oh, there are so many books about Srila Prabhupada. There's Harisoi's books, there's Mukunda Maharaj's books, there's Jamuna's diaries there, there's the Memories series, there's how many more? There's so many. Vishaka's written a book. Look, there's hundreds, there's actually dozens and dozens of books about Srila Prabhupada that you can read. These memories books that I mentioned that I was reading from, they're wonderful. They're very wonderful. And of course, then there's the Lilamrita, and it goes on and on and on. And you have the wonderful book by Guru Swami that's just come out. These are my favorite Prabhupada books. And what was the other second part of the question?
I think it got answered, Prabhu.
Yes.
Yeah. They were asking which are your favorite books and which book should they read first.
My favorite, well, of course, Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita. But of course, thinking of Prabhupada is the same as thinking of Krishna.
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you. Another question is cooking either for deities or large-scale cooking for feast? Is it a skill that can be developed with practice, or is it an innate art that only some devotees can possess?
Some devotees, there are some devotees that cook that maybe shouldn't. Then they're not very good at it, and they probably know who they are. But on the other hand, everything can be learnt with proper practice. So some people are better at cooking than other things, as Prabhupada said. Become expert in everything and specialize in one thing. So if you find that you are a good cook, and people notice that you are a good cook, and you're especially good at, say, cooking feasts, cooking for hundreds of people. Now, not everyone can do that. And if you exhibit symptoms by your practical, results, people see that this person has just cooked for 300 people, and everything's delicious. Then often these people go on to become, regular cooks. So if that is your tendency, then that can be your specialty. It's Prabhupada wanted us to specialize in something, but he also wanted us to be expert in everything. So actually, Prabhupada said everyone should learn how to cook. Prabhupada said everyone should know how to cook. Everyone, not just the ladies, but also the men should also learn how to cook and know how to cook. So Prabhupada wanted us to become expert at everything, and some people may be better at cooking than others, but yeah.
Thank you, Prabhu. Another kind of practical question. Can we use yeast for baking, for bhoga? And also can we use soya sauce? Not for baking, but for other cooking.
Yeah, okay, good question. Soya sauce. I don't think Prabhupada mentions soya sauce anywhere in any of his conversations or discussions or books or purports or lectures, morning walk conversations. But anecdotally, Hridayananda Maharaj mentions that Prabhupada told him that we shouldn't use soy, specifically in cooking for the deity. There's different types of cooking. And the higher standard of cooking, of course, is cooking for the deity. So definitely don't offer soy sauce to the deity. Sometimes devotees use soy products at home. Sometimes devotees use soy products in the restaurant, cooking in the restaurant for prasadam distribution. There are different levels, different standards, but the higher standard is cooking for the deity, and best not to use soy. And then, of course, yeast is a very popular ingredient in our Western style cooking. But traditionally in India, yeast is not a standard ingredient. You would have a natural fermentation called a khamir, and puris, like there are yeasted puris, but the dough has naturally fermented. And then you have idli, and you have jalebi, and you have doshai and vadai. And these are all made, especially dosa and idli, they're used with natural fermentation. The dal and the rice are soaked and then they ferment. So that natural ferment is used, and those things can be offered to the deity. So that's a higher standard than using yeast. And some temples they ban all these products, and some temples they're a bit more liberal. But I think that the best standard is, if you're offering things to the deity, yeast is not of the highest standard.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. One last question. Could you please suggest some simple recipes that can be used for feast programs?
No, not now.
Yeah, okay.
That's the subject of another talk. In fact, I just on this morning's or yesterday's Facebook post, uh, I published a recipe for a sabji for 350 people. It's a chickpea, potato, spinach dish that I used to cook for our restaurant in Melbourne. Um, Everything is there, all the ingredients, cooking for 350. So if you go to my Facebook page, you'll find lots of recipes. And of course, there's the cookbooks.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. Thank you, and thank you for the amazing class today, which is full of so many beautiful memories of Srila Prabhupada, and for basically reminding us that Krishna consciousness is essentially not just about like lofty philosophy. It's about just simple things like always remembering Krishna, never forgetting Krishna, and using our common sense, doing things practically, and using everything around us in Krishna's service. Thank you so much, Prabhu. It was a beautiful class, and we all relished the memories of Srila Prabhupada, especially from you, who have experienced so many of them.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Hare Krishna.
Yes. Hare Krishna. Thank you everyone for attending this session today. And as always, we are posting the links to our channel. So stay connected for many more such sessions. Next week on Sunday, we will be having His Grace Amarendra Prabhu speaking on our channel for a second time. And on Tuesday, which is a holiday in India, we'll be having um, Mataji, who is the owner of Hare Krishna TV and who is a doctor, Kalindi Mataji, and she'll be speaking for women entrepreneurs especially. So please do attend. And thank you once again, Kurma Prabhu, for being with us today. Thank you, everyone. Hare
Thank you.
Krishna.
Haribol.